Hello, students of history and political science, and welcome to Global Chat, where we explore the ins and outs of the field of study known as comparative politics. In this video presentation for my AP Comparative Government and Politics students, I want to present on the subject of nations and society, and introduce some of the things that we will learn about the people that make up the different countries we study. In this unit, we're going to learn about how people identify with different ethnic and national groups, how people develop their political values, and what governments can do to embrace societies of diverse backgrounds and beliefs. Throughout this unit, I want to encourage you to think about the following question: how do people organize politically? You can even explore this question in your own life. Ask your family or friends who are old enough to vote if they're registered to vote with a political party, or what policy issues help them decide who to vote for. Most of us know somebody who has been part of a protest, and all of us know someone who is part of a political group. Do you know somebody who is part of a group that is active in politics? You probably do, even if you're not aware of it. Political groups include everything from labor unions to activist organizations. Even churches in the United States are allowed to advocate for or against political issues and are involved in politics at least a little bit in that way. The bottom line is, no matter who you are, we are all connected to a larger community and to our political system in some way. And today, we're going to learn about the many different ways that people like us are brought together politically. Let's take a look at some of the institutions that bring people together into political groups. We can start with nationality and ethnicity, then take a look at the difference between nationalism and patriotism. We will also have to explain what it means for someone to be a citizen of a state and explore the ways in which people acquire their political values. Nationality and ethnicity are two closely related terms that actually mean very different things. On the left, we have a definition of nationality, which is a group of people brought together through commonalities like race, religion, language, ethnicity, but most importantly, political aspirations. In order for us to refer to a group of people as a nation or as having a nationality, we have to be able to say that that group wants to have a shared system of government for themselves, that they feel united through their political aspirations, that is. My dad, for example. My dad was born in Germany, and his first language was German. Like most Germans, he comes from a family of Christians, and he is a German citizen. He feels that he is a part of Germany, and that he has an interest in what happens to Germany, his home country. So when he fills out a form and is asked what his nationality is, he can put that he is German. Ethnicity, on the other hand, is something slightly different. When we talk about ethnicity, what we're talking about is people who are brought together by shared culture, language, beliefs, religion, traditions, and place of origin. If you've ever been to New York City, though, you'll really understand what I mean by this. New York is a remarkably diverse city. There are Muslims and Christians, Buddhists and Hindus. There are people who speak Chinese, Korean, Italian, Irish, and German. There are people who are from the Middle East and people who are from Northern Africa. And yet, most people who live in New York City would say that they're Americans. And that's because while the city is ethnically very diverse, most people who live there share a sense of nationality, at least somewhat. This is a great time to talk about the difference between nationalism and patriotism. Like we just said, having a sense of nationalism means that a group of people identifies as wanting to be part of the same political system. In some parts of the world, there are groups of people who live in one country but who want to create an independent state of their own. In the picture on the left, a man is waving a Palestinian flag. The Palestinian people live in Israel, but have been trying to create an independent state for decades. This kind of thing happens in other countries as well. Starting in the 1990s, a group of people in Russia known as the Chechens fought to try and become independent. And in the 1960s, the Igbo people tried to secede from Nigeria and establish a state known as Biafra, in something that is today remembered as the Biafran Civil War. Patriotism is something a little bit different. Patriotism really just means pride in one's state. In the United States, we celebrate our country's independence every year on the 4th of July. Across the country, people dress up wearing red, white, and blue, shoot off fireworks, have family cookouts. Other countries around the world have similar celebrations, such as Bastille Day in France or German Unity Day in Germany. These are all national celebrations during which people like to go out and demonstrate their patriotism or their pride. Finally, we need to talk about citizenship. When you are a citizen, Your allegiance to a state is rewarded with benefits or rights, such as the right to vote, the right to hold public office, the right to work legally in that state, and even the right to travel with a passport issued by that state. So I became a citizen of the United States in the early 2000s, and I moved here almost a decade before that. The process of becoming a US citizen was not easy, and it took my family almost 10 years. Actually, my parents and I are dual citizens of Germany and the United States because we applied to maintain our German citizenship in addition to our American citizenship. So, because of this, I have the right to vote in both Germany and the United States. And until a few years ago, I lived and worked in Germany while I was a graduate student there, and I didn't need a work visa or anything like that. So, citizenship is different from nationality. When someone asks me for my nationality, for example, I can answer that, like my dad, I'm German, but that I am a dual citizen of the United States and Germany. Also, I'm very proud of my US citizenship, and I celebrate the 4th of July with my friends every year. It can get a little bit confusing, but we have to try and use the words nationality, ethnicity, patriotism, and citizenship correctly. Now that we know a little bit more about nationality, ethnicity, and citizenship, let's learn about political culture, which is the collective attitudes, values, and beliefs of a group of people and the norms of behavior in that political system. To try and understand political culture and why groups of people have different political cultures, let's do a hypothetical example. I made up a person, from Shandong, let's say, and I called her Yuyan, and I gave her the characteristics of the kind of person you might meet if you traveled to Shandong province in China. Like her family and everyone around her, let's pretend that Yuyan speaks Mandarin Chinese and that she's not very religious. When she grew up, religion was not something that people around her talked about or participated in, and she doesn't consider herself to be a part of any church, temple, mosque, or other religious institution. We can say that Yu Yan is probably going to be pretty passive in terms of politics. In other words, that means she doesn't feel that she has an important role to play in holding the Chinese government accountable. Governing, making laws, and determining official policies to keep order in China is the job of the government. And Yu Yan doesn't feel that she needs or wants to participate in government all that much. Yu Yan values the good of the people around her over her own well being. She might think to herself something like, what good does it do me if I'm happy, comfortable, and well, if everyone around me is not? This is something that we call collectivism, and is roughly the opposite of individualism, where someone values independence and is less concerned with the good of the whole group. Yu Yan is somebody who follows rules. She believes that it is the role of the government to make sure that people follow laws and rules, and she appreciates when rules stay pretty much the same, and she believes everyone should follow the rules and laws. Where did Yu Yan acquire her views? Well, this is where all of us have a lot in common with Yu Yan. We all acquire our political culture through a process called political socialization. In school, Yu Yan learned values from her teachers, but also by interacting with her peers. At home, Yu Yan's family taught her to share many of their beliefs and values. The media, including things like the news or social media, obviously also play a role in shaping Yu Yan's views. Now, because Yu Yan is not particularly religious, religion was less important in shaping her political culture. But for many people around the world, religion is also an important agent for political socialization. As we set out to study the societies and systems of government around the world, we're going to bump into a variety of political ideas or belief systems. The ideas and ideologies that we will be studying, they act as a kind of cement for social groups. They give them some unifying beliefs, some unifying values. Let's take a look at some of the most common isms, some of the most common belief systems in this section. Before we do, let me say that we hear words like liberal, communist, fascist, socialist used all the time, but those words are rarely used correctly. By understanding what they really mean, we can get a better grasp for how these political ideas and ideologies can serve to inspire and guide political action. It's probably good to start with a definition of the term political ideology, but I should mention also that there's not really an agreed upon definition of the term among political scientists. For our purposes, though, let's for now just say that it's a set of values and beliefs about the goals of government, public policy, or politics. One way that we can understand different political ideologies is to consider the degree to which they value freedom and equality. Freedom is the degree to which members of a society are able to act without government oppression or coercion, while equality is the degree to which members of a society are equal in terms of political power or influence. To better understand this, we can kind of pinpoint where different political ideologies fall on a kind of coordinate system like this one. Here, the vertical axis indicates whether that political ideology places a low or a high value on freedom, while the horizontal axis shows us the degree to which it embraces equality. Let's first take a closer look at individualism, which places a high value on individual freedom but not equality. Socialism, which seeks a balance between freedom and equality. Communism, which hopes to achieve absolute equality but at the expense of individual freedom. And fascism, where neither freedom nor equality are of much importance, and only really the strength of the state is what matters. In political science, individualism is more correctly called liberalism. So, like the name implies, the central value is liberty or freedom. Liberals or individualists believe that people are individuals who are endowed with reason and should be free to pursue happiness, and that this same freedom should be extended to all people in society. This ideology has very deep roots in Western Europe and in the United States, where it really is everywhere in our culture, our economy, and our political life. On the left, I have a photo of Margaret Thatcher, who was the first female Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1979 to 1990. Today, she's remembered as a champion of liberal values, and she spent her time as the head of the British government trying to reduce the role of the state in the British economy. Actually, her emphasis on the importance of free markets and limited government interference in the economy is a set of ideas that we often call neoliberalism. We're going to talk more about neoliberalism in our next unit on political economy. Another political ideology that has become prevalent in Western democracies like the United Kingdom and the United States is socialism. At its core, socialism is based on the idea that all people should be socially equal. Parties such as the British Labour Party have sought to empower their ideas at the ballot box and believe that the state has a role to play in guaranteeing a basic material standard of living for all people. In the 1900s, this was often achieved by nationalizing major industries. Today, socialists often advocate for reforms that allow the state to provide better education programs, housing for the very poor, and other social expenditures with the aim of abolishing poverty. On the left, I have a photo of Keir Starmer, the present-day leader of the British Labour Party, which continues to define itself as a democratic socialist party. Communism is a political ideology that emerged in the 1800s. At the time, the Industrial Revolution created harsh and inhuman conditions for the working class. Early socialists sought a radical alternative to the industrial capitalist world that they lived in. In 1917, a man by the name of Vladimir Lenin seized on a chance to bring about these kinds of changes through a revolution. The idea of communism really took hold in Russia for most of the rest of the 20th century after this, which is what we know as the Russian Revolution. China was soon to follow. In 1949, a man by the name of Mao Zedong led the Chinese Communist Party to power as it overthrew the nationalist government in a revolution of its own. Just as the Russian revolutionaries had tried before him, Mao led his government to take near total control of the Chinese economy, always with the goal of reducing social and material inequality. Because communists in Russia, China, and elsewhere in the world sought so radically to achieve material and social equality, they had no room for individual freedom, and what emerged were tyrannical governments that were capable of really horrific cruelty. We're going to be learning about the impact that the rise of communism had on Russia and China later on in our course. Unlike the other ideologies that have come up, fascism does not value political freedom or equality. Instead, fascism holds that the strength of the state is the most important goal of any political system. There are examples of fascist regimes throughout history. Germany under Nazi rule, Italy under Mussolini, Russia under Stalin, and China under Mao. In the world today, North Korea is an example of a state where fascism continues to thrive. What has been particularly disturbing about fascism in history is that it promotes extreme nationalism, where those who are in the ethnic majority are granted more rights than those who are ethnic minorities. In the 1930s, for example, it was the Nazi Party's goal to rebuild a strong German state for the benefit of only the German people. This was to be done at the expense of ethnic and religious minorities in Central Europe, especially the Jewish people, who suffered unspeakable horrors under Nazi rule. Okay, so at this point, I want to bring up a political idea that I did not mention earlier, and that's the idea of populism. So, populism is the idea that the people are being exploited by some politically elite group. Populist political movements can share a wide range of other political views, but they're united in the hope of bringing down a common enemy at the ballot box. Let me give you a couple of examples. In 2016, the British government held something called a referendum on whether or not the country should continue to be a part of the European Union. A referendum, by the way, is when the public is allowed to vote on a policy issue to inform a government's decision. Anyway, Prime Minister David Cameron and the Conservative Party argued that being in the European Union was good because it made a lot more trade possible, allowed people from all over Europe to live or work in Britain, and was generally good for the British economy. On the other side was Nigel Farage. Now, he was our populist leader of the UK Independence Party at the time. He argued that being in the European Union meant that lots of foreigners could immigrate to Britain, that they could displace British workers, and that some of these immigrants could be potentially dangerous. He held that it was in the interests of the British people to vote against the so called elites like David Cameron, who supposedly wanted what was good for big business owners and other economic elites at the expense of the British people. So, in the end, the voters did actually decide to leave the European Union, but only barely. 52% of voters indicated that they wanted to leave. The effects of this decision are ongoing. The UK will leave the European Union at the end of this year, 2020. Another way that we will be describing the political values of people or groups of people is by talking about political attitudes. So, in this presentation so far, you may have heard me use words like radical, liberal, conservative, and reactionary. These are what we can call political attitudes, and they represent the degree of change that members of society hope to see, and the way in which that change ought to be brought about. In other words, when we're talking about someone's political attitude, we're talking about how much change they want to see in the political system that they live in. These are the terms that you will hear us use very commonly in our course, and you will probably already be familiar with some of them if you've ever watched people talk politics on TV, the radio, social media, or elsewhere. And just like political ideologies, people often use these words quite carelessly or without regard to what they actually mean. On the left side of the spectrum, we see the term liberal. Now, don't confuse this with the ideology of liberalism, it's not the same thing. Liberals support change to improve the political, social, and economic institutions, but change can happen within the system. They do not believe that it is necessary to overthrow the entire political system, but that change can be brought about from within or through the existing system of government. The term radical describes people who desire dramatic, revolutionary change, sometimes even through violence. They believe it is necessary to remake the institutions of government, the regime, and the state as a whole. To the right side of the spectrum is the term conservative, which are people who would prefer to maintain the status quo. They view change as disruptive or bad. Conservatives don't believe that change to existing institutions is necessary or even desirable. Further to the right, reactionaries seek to go back in time. What they want to do is restore political, social, and economic institutions to some past regime or state that they believed was superior. They don't really want to return to a specific period, but an envisioned past ideal that may never actually have existed. All right, I think that's enough of an overview of political ideologies for now. Let's just keep these terms in mind as we start studying different countries and their political systems, because we're going to run into these terms again and again. Finally, let's take a look at social and political cleavages and how these can undermine political stability. Political cleavages are divisions that emerge in societies. These differences can occur between different ethnic groups or national groups, or even between people with different political beliefs or values. The most serious divisions can lead to conflict, and sometimes violent conflict. States can respond to these conflicts in different ways, but it's important that states respond in a way that does not further undermine political legitimacy. Let's think about what it means first for a state to be fragile, and what it means for a state to be stable. Organizations that track these sorts of things look at a whole bunch of different qualities, but these are among some of the most important. Fragile states may have religious, ethnic, or national conflict. They may be economically underdeveloped, they may be unable to provide basic political goods such as schools, infrastructure, and healthcare, and there may be issues of human rights abuses. Almost without exception, states that have these kinds of characteristics also have a very low degree of political legitimacy, as societies are dissatisfied with their government's ability to perform basic functions and provide the political goods that they demand. One organization that ranks state stability through exactly these kinds of characteristics is the Fund for Peace. I think by now in our course, we're not surprised to find that the United Kingdom tops the list, followed by Mexico, then China, Russia, and Iran. Ranking only 14th, Nigeria is near the top of the list of the world's most fragile states. One of the problems that Nigeria faces is that it's divided along religious lines, where the north is predominantly Muslim and the south predominantly Christian. In a previous presentation, I had mentioned that Nigeria's federal structure does help to avoid conflicts that could emerge out of this religious division by giving state governments a lot of local autonomy. Nevertheless, there continue to be struggles between North and South in the political arena. The People's Democratic Party, for example, gets its support almost exclusively from southern states in Nigeria, and its voter base is predominantly Christian. In the North, Muslim voters tend to favor the All Progressives Congress. But this religious division in Nigerian society has manifested itself in other, more serious ways, too. In northeastern Nigeria, in the state of Borno in particular, an Islamist group calling itself Boko Haram has emerged. Boko Haram, which literally translates to Western education is sinful, hopes to overthrow the Nigerian government and establish an Islamic state in West Africa. There has been resistance to Western education by Muslims in northern Nigeria since the British colonized it in 1903. And to this day, many in northern Nigeria refuse to send their children to so-called government-run schools. The founder of Boko Haram, Muhammad Yusuf, set up a mosque and Islamic school in 2002. Now, this school ultimately became a means for recruiting jihadis. Since then, Yusuf has been killed by Nigerian security forces, pictured here, and the group's new leader swore allegiance to IS, or Islamic State. For the time being, it's likely that this national division in Nigerian society will continue to undermine state stability. In the Niger Delta, a different problem has emerged. For decades, companies like Shell have been involved in joint ventures to extract oil. This has led to a good deal of environmental damage in the region, and local communities, such as the Ogoni and Ijaw people, have watched as the river that is a source of livelihood for many fishermen has been polluted. In addition, locals have felt that while foreign companies such as Shell Oil have made a fortune, while their communities remain economically underdeveloped. Many locals feel as though they have been exploited, while the Nigerian government and foreign multinational corporations have profited and left their land and river polluted. Where these areas used to depend on the production and export of cocoa, rubber, cotton, and groundnuts, pollution and displacement have left many Nigerians without a sustainable livelihood. Under all of these pressures, armed groups emerged in the region in the early 2000s. Some of these groups, like the Niger Delta People's Volunteer Force, have engaged in oil theft by tapping pipelines owned by the government and multinational oil corporations. Since then, violence has escalated, with some groups, such as the Movement for the Emancipation of the Niger Delta, or MEND, even taking the children of foreign oil company employees hostage. Since 2008, the Nigerian military has intervened. In 2009, then-President Umaru Yar'Adua signed an amnesty program into law where militants would be given a period of time to surrender and turn over their weapons in exchange for what the government called training and rehabilitation. Since then, this program has been seen as largely a failure, and many of these problems in the region persist to the present day and may even be getting worse. In this presentation, we've talked about the concepts of nationality and ethnicity, different political ideologies, and the impact of social cleavages on societies. For more information and additional resources, please check in the description below this video. And remember to subscribe to catch more of our videos. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.